Welcome back to the Kinema Podcast. I'm Christy Marchese. I'm the CEO of Kinema. And in this episode, we go deep into the doc industry with the brilliant Loira Limbal. Loira became president and CEO of Firelight Media last year, but has a 16-year track record of supporting the organization, from leading the expansion of the documentary lab to launching and supporting the Groundwork Regional Lab, the William Greaves Research and Development Fund, the Impact Campaign Fund, and the In the Making documentary short film series. So in this episode, we're going to dig into how Firelight Media is supporting filmmakers of color in a myriad of ways amidst all of our industry challenges, and what the opportunity is for filmmakers right now everywhere. I'm also 100% on board with what Loira's vision is and fully agree to what she thinks we should all be doing right now. So jump in and let's listen. And we are here with the president and CEO of Firelight Media, Loira Limbal. Welcome and thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
I'm a big fan of Firelight Media. I'm very familiar, but if you don't mind, in your words, can you tell us, for those who might not know, what is Firelight Media? What is your mission? And how do you execute that mission?
Yes, absolutely. So Firelight Media is a nonprofit that exists to support, resource, and advocate on behalf of documentary filmmakers of color. We were founded 25 years ago by filmmaker Stanley Nelson and his partner in life and work, Marcia Smith. And we, from day one have been supporting emerging filmmakers of color and continue to do that work to today.
You guys have an amazing brand. And what's interesting is when I think about Firelight, I think about the films often associated. But you guys, you don't produce films. You have programs in which, like the founders, they produced films. They were filmmakers, and they also had this organization. So can you tell me how that worked? Is it mostly a program-based? How does a nonprofit serve filmmakers? And when I think of Firelight Films, is that because these are projects you backed, or maybe those were like Stanley films?
Yeah, so I'll take you to explain our programs and sort of how we do our work. I'll take you back to the origin. So many, many years ago, there was one entity, one organization, which was Firelight Media. And Firelight Media was Stanley Nelson's nonprofit production company. So he was making films like The Murder of Emmett Till and Freedom Summer and Freedom Riders and through this nonprofit production company. And around 2011, we decided to create a sister company, so Firelight Films, which is now Stanley's production company. And then really have Firelight Media, that nonprofit, be solely dedicated to supporting sort of the next generation of documentary filmmakers of color. And that area of focus and sort of that initial program really was born out of a really organic set of demands. Stanley and Marcia would have every so often a filmmaker of color reach out to them and say, listen, I'm working on this film about X, Y, and Z. Would you take a look at my treatment? Or could you give me fundraising advice? Or, what about this? Or what about that? Can I intern on your project? Because Stanley Nelson, obviously, then and now has been one of the most visible, most successful, prolific Black documentary filmmakers in the US. And so he was a point of reference for others who were trying to get into the space that can be kind of opaque, right? For people, especially for most of the filmmakers we support, they're not coming out of film school. They're telling these stories because oftentimes they're the stories of their communities, because they have a social justice sort of goal in mind, a real sort of visceral need to tell a particular story, but don't necessarily know how to go about it and how to get into the space. And so that's how Firelight Media's mission, right, of serving emerging filmmakers of color was born.
It makes sense. And it is actually, I think, intentionally an industry without much transparency. It was more difficult to break it. I think in some ways it's changed a little bit, but I mean, we can get into that. But no, it seems intentionally hard to get into. So it makes sense why there's organizations like Firelight to help kind of navigate that process or break that process or go around it. Can you walk us through some of the programs that you have right now at Firelight Media to help filmmakers?
Absolutely. So we think about our approach, and then I think a couple things that are important to say, right? We're Black founded, Black led, but also filmmaker led, right? Stanley is a filmmaker, Marsha's a filmmaker, I'm a filmmaker. Many of our staff members are filmmakers. And so I think, that's something that really informs how we do the work, because we understand, the work from the inside out. And so our programs are designed sort of with that in mind. And we have a range of programs. Some are geared at really early career filmmakers, folks that are outside of the kind of main industry hubs of New York and California, like our Homegrown series. It's a short film series where we commission filmmakers of color in underserved regions of the country, and we'll build out a slate of 4 to 8 shorts, work with different partners to distribute those stories, and in the process, give early career filmmakers of color like a concrete on-ramp into something and a budget that allows them to start a project and finish a project and actually, sort of cut their teeth and build their filmmaking chops and also build their body of work. So we have programs like that aimed at early career filmmakers. Then we have things that are like the Documentary Lab, for example, which is a fellowship. It's one of our most robust programs. And that's aimed at filmmakers, that we consider sort of emerging, that are working maybe on their first or second feature documentary that has the potential for a national sort of distribution strategy, national broadcast, national audiences. And through that fellowship, we give grants $25,000. There's professional development retreats, mentorship. And it's really, again, about we know that money is great. And if you're early on in your career, it's not the only thing that you need. And so working with filmmakers to ensure, right, that they can make the best version of the story that they want to tell. We also have a newer program called the Firelight Funds, which we launched last summer, which is meant to be sort of our more urgent, more rapid response. Not quite rapid response, but it's a fund that was really aimed at being able to get money out a little bit quicker to projects that might otherwise not receive support because of their political content, because it's race conscious, it's racial justice work. And as we know right now, folks are very scared of anything DEI, quote unquote, related. And so looking at those projects that might not otherwise get support, but that are really necessary and urgent portrayals and reflections of what's happening in the country right now. So that's just a grant. It's not a fellowship. And then always, there's the other piece of the work, which is about advocating on behalf of our filmmakers. And that includes a lot of customized sort of support and relationship building and trying to connect folks to others in the space. Also, raising the uncomfortable questions, right? And having the more difficult conversations, doing a bit of constructive disruption, as we like to say, because as an institution, we're in a position to take a little bit of heat, right? That maybe an individual filmmaker of color can't afford, right? To take that kind of heat or take certain things on. Well, we see it as our role to do that work. And I think maybe I'll close by saying the thinking behind and the design of our programs have always been informed by the conversations with our filmmakers and what we see is happening and what people need. And so another fund that we launched a few years ago called the William Greaves Research and Development Fund came about because we had filmmakers make a first documentary and do really well and win a lot of awards, and then they couldn't get their second project off the ground, right? And then people leave the space altogether. And so we were like, okay, there needs to be not just more research and development funding in general, but research and development funding for filmmakers of color, because the kind of broader backdrop of all of this, if we zoom out from just the documentary space, specifically, is the broader picture is that, I just heard this statistic the other day at a town hall meeting that I was at, that only 2.9% of all philanthropy goes to BIPOC-led and BIPOC-serving nonprofits. Again, that's not just specific to the documentary, that's the big picture. If we were to do that assessment in our field, I'd be curious to see, what those numbers are. And so, there's still a real need. And I think, the situation in the country certainly suggests that there is a lot more need for race-conscious, racial justice work to be done.
I heard the same stat. It was something like 2 to 3% of all philanthropic dollars in the U.S. specifically go to BIPOC or API-backed focused organizations. It's a very shocking number. We hear it in the venture space. We're still, after all these years, 2% of venture dollars go into female-led companies. Like, these numbers are still real. And while we thought we were gaining traction coming into the pandemic, even the first early years, because I'll use that pandemic period as a marker. No, coming out and with this new presidency, I think we've all felt the impact of that. And I think you yourself said to, was it Variety, like your budget was cut by 40+% because of like the federal rollbacks. That's massive. And everybody's feeling it on a different level. So I want to say first, thank you for the programs you're doing, hearing how you're covering creating a product. So as filmmakers have a product to go into market with. So they have something that they can show their work, to doing the rapid response funds, the fact that they're off a timeline, off a grant cycle, so they're happening when the money is needed, to the creating the community aspect of it, to also being that front line of defense. It's almost like you've created this like Avengers like force field around the filmmakers in your system of like, you need a film, we got you. You need money, we got you. Like we're looking 10 years ahead for the industry, we got you here. So it really is incredible that the work you're doing. But there are some challenges. Where are you finding support for Firelight Media? Like where can the industry support Firelight Media back?
Well, before I answer that question, I do want to say that the Firelight Fund is not rolling. So I don't want to give folks the impression that we can just give money out all the time. Yeah, we just pivoted. For us, it was a first because our programs tend to be sort of siloed by like, is this a shorts program? Is this a features program? And in the Firelight Fund, we said, we'll support shorts, we'll support features, and we'll support impact campaigns as well. And it was really about like, what is the work that people are, making now that needs to be supported because it's not going to get support elsewhere at whatever stage it's in. And so it was much more flexible in that way and really intended about like, just let's get the dollars into our filmmakers' hands. So that's, the Firelight Fund. But in terms of support and where we're finding support, so our model for the past 25 years had been a lot of public media funding and private philanthropy, right? Private foundation support. We've lost all of our public media funding, so that's the 41%. And that for us comes because of the dissolution and the closing of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and then the subsequent impacts on PBS themselves, which has caused them to pull back and stop funding and supporting a lot of things. So that 41% is gone. So what we're left with is the private philanthropy sector. Luckily, our main sort of foundation partners are still supporting us and are committed to the work. But we don't know where we make up the 40% from. And as a BIPOC-led institution, we haven't traditionally had like a lot of access to high net worth donors and, sort of private giving in that way. So it is something that we're now looking to really explore and put some real energy and effort to, because the other statistic that I heard from a board member is that in the US, when you talk about arts and culture funding, the corporate support is negligent and has been negligent for a long time, right? For arts and culture. Foundation support is declining. The only area that is growing is individual giving. And so I'm like, all right. And I know that there's money in the world. We just have to find it, and so in terms of people wanting to support us, anyone that's values aligned, that has insights, into these other spaces of giving, I think that's a huge thing for us. And then I think the other piece of it is that we are really interested in partnering, again, with values aligned folks to, be in spaces that perhaps we hadn't been in the past, because the reality is that the funding model that built Firelight over the last 25 years no longer exists. Yeah. So we have to pivot, and we have to move out of our comfort zone.
Is that something where, we talk about this in fundraising for, for nonprofits, for businesses, it's about creating a network of people. So is it helpful of like, for anybody listening that's like, wait, I'm a fan of Firelight, I know 5 people that I could introduce Firelight to. Is that, it seems like the human network is one of the most powerful you can have of, if everyone listening could introduce just a couple people to Loira, like that might just open up some pathways to meet new people. Because you're right, there is actually a fair of money out there. It's not evenly distributed, but there's money out there. So it's just about making the right introductions and building those relationships. Does that sound right?
That sounds 100% right. I was talking to Charlotte Cook from Field of Vision the other day, and she was saying, like, we need to bring back patrons, like people that just support the work because They know that it's important and critical to have a healthy, functional democracy. Like cultural expression is a necessity, right? And we know this because they have come after the arts, right, and the culture sector with a vengeance so quickly and have just completely eviscerated an entire, ecosystem and a ton of infrastructure because they know how powerful this work is. So we, on this other side of the equation, we need to be just as clear and just as decisive and insistent and stubborn about the value and the importance of the work that we do and invite folks that believe in that to support us because it really matters now more than ever. I think like beyond our field and beyond the industry, what's at stake is all of our civil rights and all of our human rights. So the stakes are high.
Yeah.
The stakes are really high.
It's if I was watching an old movie last night. Have you ever seen Amadeus? It came out in like the 80s.
I have not.
Okay, so I hadn't seen it either. So it was like, okay, what a bunch of awards. I was seeing it. And a big part of it is about how art survived. How does an artist survive? How does Mozart make money? And he's entirely dependent on the patronage system, which in some ways is, frustrating for him. But also, we don't have that system. We don't really have a strong patronage. And in his case, it was the church and the government, the Austrian government. But there weren't really any other options. It feels like we have even less now. So it's up to the individual patrons. And it's not just through our art consumption, which I want to talk about again in a minute, because that's the commercialized version of it. But how do we encourage everyone to become a patron? I know Firelight has actually a monthly giving program. Like you can sign up and give like $5 or $20 a month. There are affordable ways to become a patron of the arts.
Yes, please.
Yeah, great. That one's easy. We can do that. Like think how much we pay for Netflix. So yes, I do believe in the patronage of the arts. But what's interesting about film is it's where art meets commerce. We talk about this a lot. So it can become expensive to make films. And so where does Firelight Media fit in, whether it's your personal perspective or from the organization? And once the films are done, it's whether it's supporting an impact campaign or advising on distribution. Well, that's both the top level and low level. What are you seeing from a high level perspective of what's going on in the industry at this point? And you came in at a tough time for distribution when you joined this organization. What are you seeing in the past year, not just in terms of challenges, but also opportunities?
Sure. It is a tough and challenging time. In the US, the sort of biggest distribution platforms and spaces and avenues have been, for the longest time, was public media, right? Which I think is something that often goes unsaid, that this sort of ecosystem of documentary film in the United States is what it is because public media built it. The issue there is that, in my view, they never properly claimed it or highlighted it or celebrated it, right? And so then you have the commercial, players come in and, kind of come in like bulls in a china shop and just break a lot of things real fast.
I mean, that was the saying of Silicon Valley, move fast and break things.
Yeah. And we saw them do that in our space, right? The issue there is that over these last however many years, well, at least for me, this is how I see it. Part of the opportunity right now is actually for us as filmmakers, as organizations that serve filmmakers, to reclaim what the actual project is and why we do this work. Because I think we, in a sort of push for inclusion into the spaces and these kind of opportunities and all this, everything seemed like it was glittery, right? And people were talking about the golden era of documentary filmmaking and wanted to be a part of that and get a piece of that. We conceded a lot of ground. We internalized the logic of a lot of these platforms, which at the end of the day are tech platforms, right? Which different bottom lines and different missions. They don't exist. There isn't mission alignment, right? And so now that doesn't mean that you can't partner with different kinds of organizations and players, but you better make sure that there's mission alignment. And we sort of lost sight of that, and even worse, adopted their sort of logic and their metrics and their measurements. And I think right now the opportunity is to refuse and reject a lot of that and say, we do this work because we believe that cultural change precedes social and political change. It is where you can seed new ideas, right? And make the ground fertile for change to become possible. That's why we do this work. The rest of it is a means to an end, but we have to be clear about what the actual end is. And I think that's the real opportunity right now. And if we can get that clarity of purpose as a field, as an ecosystem, then I think what we'll see is like, yes, things are bad. A lot has been lost. And also there are still a lot of us in the space wanting, believing, wanting and willing to do really good work. And so if we can orient ourselves to each other and sort of stop looking outside at some big like silver bullet that's going to come in and save us, I think there's a real opportunity, there to come out with something that's actually sort of more diverse in terms of like you think of ecosystems and healthy ecosystems and like the biodiversity that you need, for that to be like a thriving, healthy ecosystem. I think like that's the opportunity. We might be able to come out of this healthy, but we have to be clear about what it is that we're doing, and we have to reject and refuse certain things.
I think that it makes complete sense from like a mission standpoint. When it comes to kind of putting that in practice, it seems like you guys are doing part of that already. I think it's part of collectiveness. It's like filmmaking is one of the most collective art forms there is. It's near impossible to do on your own, but you're doing it through collective creation, collective support, and then also, I guess, collective change making through on the advocacy side. Because I'd say most of the people who listen and watch are in the industry, a majority independent filmmakers, and they're making their feature now, or they're making their short now, and they're kind of making these decisions on how to enter into the space. Do you have any sort of advice or guidance in order to kind of help not make some mistakes that we made in the past, or be clear about the mission? Is that aligning with organizations and people out there? Is it being more conscious about where they distribute their films? When there's limited options, sometimes that's tough. For someone who's listening now and is an emerging filmmaker, what are some steps they could take to participate in this mission?
So I would say this is a really tough time to be a filmmaker. To be an indie filmmaker, an indie documentary filmmaker, an indie documentary filmmaker of color from a community that is, directly under attack by this current administration. This is a really hard time. So if this is what you're choosing to do, you have to be really clear about why you're choosing to do this, because it's going to be an uphill battle, right? So, I think in the past, we were having a conversation often about like sustainability and how do you make filmmaking more sustainable. I think right now, to be honest with filmmakers, it's a conversation about continuity, right? It's not a conversation about sustainability. It's like, how do we become part of the legacy of artists, of filmmakers, of storytellers who have created the necessary art that documents like the turmoil and the turbulence of their time. And that's a long project, but that's the project in my view. And, and that's the position we're taking as Firelight. And so that means you need to know, right? Like oftentimes we hear a filmmaker come into one of our programs and you ask like, okay, so, if you get your ideal sort of distribution scenario, what does that look like? What are the elements? And they say, oh, I would love a theatrical. I want to premiere at Sundance. I want a theatrical, and I want to end up on Netflix. Right?
Very true. Hear it a lot still.
Yeah, we hear it a lot still. And so then it's like, well, let's have the real talk conversation about all of those things. And if that's why you're doing it, I would say you're probably not in the right, space. Now, that said, I'm not going to pretend like, prestige and money doesn't matter, right? Like that matters, especially because people want to keep having a career, and you need, right, certain visibility and certain recognition and this, that, and the third. So to me, it's like, that's fine. But again, that has to be like the byproduct. That's almost like the collateral that comes from you making something that is because you're making it because you have to make it, right? Like it's coming from your heart. And because you have something to contribute to the world. And as a filmmaker, this is the way that you can make a unique contribution. That needs to be the starting point. It can't be about money. The starting point cannot be money, and it cannot be awards. Not right now, because I think to pretend like it can is to be a little bit delusional. Because the reality is that money and that prestige has been reserved for always like a handful of people. The brand name filmmakers, it's a handful of people. That they're the exception. They're not the rule. But there's, hundreds and hundreds, thousands of documentary filmmakers creating necessary, vital work. So, I think we have to just have like some real talk about like, why are you in it? because if it's all external motivations and not internal motivations, you're not going to be able to cut it because it's hard right now. Like people have to also like recalibrate their budgets, budgets for, a feature documentary, easily 1 million, 2 million, people working on their first or second documentary films. It's like, well, where are you going to raise that money right now? It's not realistic. The conditions are what they are. I don't say that because I think it's how it should be. It's just a reality that we're in, And so again, then it's like, then you have to make a choice. And I would say we do have choices to make. We have agency. There's so much on the line. So we have to decide, like, what is it that we're fighting for? What is it that we dream of? What are we building? Like having, those conversations with each other, I think is critical.
Perfectly said. What are in this challenge environment, if we all can be clear about our mission and goals, and we see this the same way in running a business, running an organization. I didn't enter the independent film distribution business to become a billionaire. I'll tell you that.
Exactly.
Yeah, I want to create an environment that can help film thrive. I want to create a space where there can be some sort of middle economy for filmmakers. We look at some of the best filmmakers we have today. They exist because we had the Sundance system, because they played at smaller festivals, because they had time to hone their craft. I want to make sure we still have that. And so it's yes, the more mission driven we all can be. And in this challenging environment, I guess, what are some other opportunities you would see? So if while we are losing funding, it allows us to be more clear about what's important to us, or maybe we can bring our budgets down a little bit. And while there are less buyers, that also in a way puts us in a position of not having to be reliant on those buyers in a sense. Like when there's less buyers overall, and I'm hearing this from even some established filmmakers that typically would sell to a bigger streamer, they're looking for new opportunities. So are there, I guess I can name a couple, but have you heard of any new opportunities? Are there new things that get you excited, whether it's PBS on YouTube or new companies forming or creative strategies? What are you seeing out there that at least is trying to shift us in a better direction and find some good in this frustrating experience?
Oh, absolutely. I'm extremely excited. So I think what's happened, right, is that the big fish in our fields have left, right? So it's like, if you think of it's like a cake or something, the middle of it fell out of the cake, right? So now there's nothing in the middle, whether that was the commercial streamers who are not really supporting the kinds of independent nonfiction stories that we're supporting, right? They basically have all but said, this is not what we're interested in. So they're not really in the space in the same way that they were, 5-10 years ago. And then public media is also, right? We've lost that federal funding. So that center has bottomed out. And that's a loss. It impacts a lot of people. I don't want to minimize that. And I think the opportunity in that is that it allows us to then see, well, what is left? And then we have all this stuff left, which is actually 360, which is brilliant and vibrant. And it is all the impact and engagement work that we've done for decades to reach all sorts of different communities in super innovative ways. Maybe it's this now is an opportunity for the things that we talked about as alternative or on the margins, for that to become our new center. We can do that if we orient ourselves that way, if we legitimize and validate these things as not alternative. This is not what you do because Netflix didn't buy you your film. No, this is what you do because this is how the film circulates and reaches the people that the film was made for, right? Mm-hmm. This is how the film makes the kind of change that you want the film to make to begin with. And I think that to me is super exciting, because I see that as potentially very decentralized, very multifaceted, very layered, lots of different partnerships, across sectors. That to me is really exciting. And again, I think for me, that's the vision of if we can orient towards that and agree and say, no, all of this stuff is prestigious and just as important. And this is where I'm going to put my energy and my effort, right? And we build that up and we orient towards each other. That's how I think potentially we come out healthier, as an ecosystem. So that to me is really exciting. I think anytime you can decentralize things, it's always good for artists. It's always good for communities of color, for indies,
Yes, no, the mesh network, the collaboration, the community aspect, the decentralization is the best word. It's very, on the tech side, we think oh, decentralization, blockchain. No, decentralization has been around for a while. There have been people who have been learning how to do it. We don't need technology to do it. It's a people network.
I mean, in some ways, like we could take the example, Carrie Lozano from ITVS, who is also a journalist. She always talks about this in kind of our meeting spaces where she talks about like the crisis of journalism a couple, years ago, right? Like they experienced what the documentary field is experiencing. They experienced that before us. And there was this collapse and newsrooms were closing and, all the things that we now know happened. And what has emerged in its place is this very decentralized, very vibrant, full ecosystem of a ton of nonprofit newsrooms, which didn't exist in the same way, before that crisis. Similarly, people talk about in our space, like theaters, cinemas are dead, theaters and people don't go to the movies, this, that, and the third. And what we're seeing post-COVID is it's not true. It's a resurgence. And also, as, folks working with filmmakers directly, like I see now theaters are much better partners to indie filmmakers. Things are cheaper. They're much more flexible. They're more open. So there's a lot of opportunities. People said that bookstores were going to die, that Amazon was going to kill bookstores. Well, what we're seeing is a resurgence in local bookstores, right? But again, these are all things that are possible if we collectively decide this is where we're going to put our energy. We actually do have agency. We can reject and refuse some things and choose some others,
I completely agree. Also, a lot of those spaces you mentioned, they're third spaces for gathering in person. Like we have all of the bigger, I'm not trying to diss on any major tech company at all, because I do participate in many of these, but like you have these big market forces and large tech entities that are driving us to be alone. It's ride in a car alone, like through a non-ride share, right? Like order your food alone, watch your TV and movie alone. All of this is driving us apart. We're starting to really feel the breaking point of that. The rise of the comeback of bookstores, I think, and movie theaters too are as social spaces. And so that's one of the things I would love to see more of movie theaters do. And I think that the indie movie theaters and the art house ones do it so well, is be a social club. So I think that those two kind of go hand in hand. We also have to actively participate. We have to choose to go out to a restaurant or just walk around the corner living in New York City, then order something. We have to choose to go to the movie theater instead of waiting however many weeks or months for it to come online. It's an active choice that we all have to make.
Yeah, and that's why I think the refusal and the rejection, right, of like logic, right? We've been told that all these things are more convenient, and so convenience equals better. But what we're seeing is that our health outcomes are worse. So we have to say, no, you lied.
Yes.
All this convenience is actually not better. We've lost some things that are essential for human beings to feel human. We have evolved as social beings. We do need connection. The other day I listened to, this was a while ago, but Trevor Noah's podcast. He interviewed the author of that book, Bowling Alone.
Oh, yes.
And this is, it's like 100 years of U.S. social history, right? Tracking like the decline of these third spaces. Like people don't bowl. They're not in bowling leagues anymore.
60% of Americans used to be in a bowling league or something crazy, right?
Right. And the fact of the matter, the connection that he makes is that disconnection, that isolation, now coupled with the misinformation era that we're in, are the perfect breeding grounds for fascism. And the opposite is true for democracy. Connection, local, decentralized, human contact. Those are the perfect breeding grounds for democracy. And so I think, again, we have to make some choices. We've been sold a false bill of goods. And we have the data, we know, right? Like,
yes,
the sort of, what the loneliness pandemic that people talk about in the United States has been very well documented. The impact of social media on young people and mental health and all sorts of things, like we know. So we have to start acting like we know, right? Like
actually have to start participating in it. And you're right. There's a film version of the book called, I think, Join or Die. There's a documentary version of the book too. It's really good to recommend if for the film watchers over readers listening. I mean, I could talk to you forever about this. I think our big takeaways are like, everybody get out of your home, go see a movie, support Firelight Media. But is there anything else you think we didn't cover, whether it's from an industry perspective to Firelight Media? Anything else you want to share?
I think maybe I would want to just put a fine point on the importance of looking at filmmakers and organizations that have a track record of doing impact and engagement work. Because the reality is that for every film that you do an impact campaign for, you build this constellation of all sorts of partners, right? And you come up with all these really unique strategies because no two communities, no two films, no two social issues are the same. And so I actually think that we already have all the answers. I don't necessarily think that it's about designing a new shiny thing. I think, again, it's a matter of let's orient towards the things that we already know work. Like we have a history to look at. We have a legacy. We are part of something, right? And so like, let's look at that. Let's orient towards that. And we do have a lot of solutions and we have people in our communities that know how to do the work. So I just would want to put a fine point on that too, that it's like, we already know like what we're doing, but they got us confused and made us think that because we weren't necessarily super successful at their game of like the millions of viewers and the clicks and the this and the that we somehow were completely failing. And sure, there's always things that could be improved. And there were certainly many things that could be improved, but there are also a lot of things that we were doing right. And let's not forget that. And let's look back at that, you know?
I completely agree. Well, Loira, thank you so much for your time. Where can we find you or Firelight Media online?
Yes, Firelight Media online is our website is firelightmedia.tv. And we're on Facebook and Instagram at Firelight Media and LinkedIn. I think that's everything. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, great. Well, thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for listening to Loira Limbal from Firelight Media. Thanks all.
Thank you, Christy.
Thank you. And that's our episode. Thank you to our special guest, our producer and editor, Ron Pissarro, and you, the filmmakers, creators, marketers, and distributors that are dedicated to connecting audiences with great films.